One is over.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
We can't have any more
it's
fun.
to know each other.
Oh.
Eyes.
Oh, my gosh. Hold
Right. Thank you for coming back so promptly, everybody.
You're a good teacher, Pete. Well, that's what time that was.
We're going to just test Teams to make sure the virtual folks can hear us. Okay.
Go inside the room.
Please stand by. Thank you. That's
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear us okay?
Perfect.
Thank you.
she's going out and walking in a tour.
There's no. Only go.
You don't want to.
Hey, facilitator voice. So now we're going to kind of review the current DEI awareness and efforts of Oregon Board of Pharmacy. And again, we're yes-anding. So we have our pluses and deltas, as it were. To harken back to my counseling days, these are areas of growth and challenge. So there has been a concerted effort to diversify the board of directors. We have different people from different professions and places in their career. There has been some education and conversation more broadly. Cultural awareness as part of continuing education for licensees, for example. The utilization of the gray box to assess impact of rules on diverse groups. Compliance with the governor's preliminary guidance, so the updated affirmative action plan that was approved. And some demographics of the staff board and licensees is recorded. So deltas, the mission, vision, values specifically related to DEI reads as boilerplate. So one of the examples is the gray box. Other places obviously are the affirmative action plan. And then the kind of essentially at this moment, non-existent DEI plan. The vision and scope of DEI is still quite narrow. When people talk about DEI, we really focus on race, gender, and orientation. And it spans the gamut of the human experience and all of the different intersections. So yes, especially in a state with Oregon, we need to lead with racial equity. There is no question about that. And we need to ensure that when we are thinking about DEI, that we're also talking about accessibility, that we're talking about rural communities, that we are understanding where even people on the board and staff are, right? And let's see here. Missed opportunities to utilize potential influence in community. With some of the conversations with some of the interested parties, it became very clear that a lot of folks don't know what y'all are doing in relation to DEI, whether big or small. They're like, oh, they're doing stuff? Cool. But they're like, I don't know what it is. And so utilizing the influence in the community to one, let them know what you all are doing, what your plans are, what your goals are, as well as continuing to input yourself into the community. And as the authority on pharmacy in the state of Oregon, kind of utilizing that, what's the word? Influence to the general practice of pharmacy. There is a need for more detailed and extensive demographics, and also as a result of that, disaggregating that information, right? So when we take from the affirmative action plan, when we take, for example, the racial demographics, there's like 3 or 4 categories that are also very broad, right? You could be white and Russian, and that's not the same experience as being white from England, right? So understanding that the information that we have needs to be more specific And that when we get that more specific information, that we disaggregate the information, which means pull it apart and look at it more deeply to kind of understand within the ways that everyone that checks this box, what are the different ways in which you can experience checking that box, as it were. And the DEI lead responsibilities, obviously in function, we need to have someone listed on the report as the DEI lead. But the responsibilities do fall to a single individual. And really for this to be effective and to be integrated into the entire organization, again, it needs to be everyone's jobs, but committees, teams, support, so that the lead is not the only individual that is doing all of this work. Because I have, people have entire businesses just on doing things like DEI plans, right? So in the example of Karen, she does also have a whole other job she gets paid for, right? So we want to make sure that the load, the brain work, the on the ground work, the research is spread across, because many hands make light work, right? And I believe that is it for this part of the presentation for me, but I really want to open the floor if folks have questions, concerns, comments about what we've reviewed in the last 20 minutes.
Board Member Doyle. I'm sharing with you a little bit of perhaps confusion on my part about clarification or understanding the differences between what the governor's office and the state of Oregon is doing versus what we, the Board of Pharmacy, are doing. And so it's not a question that you can answer right now, but I think I'm having difficulty understanding the two different elements. One example is the gray box, the third bullet point on the pluses. Utilization of the gray box to assess the impact. I think that's we're talking about the gray box that precedes our rules. And we have had questions raised in our meetings about the appropriateness of some of the information placed in there. And then under the deltas, the first bullet point, mission vision values, boilerplate, i.e. gray box. That appears to me maybe not something that we are, as the Board of Pharmacy, are doing, but that's a directive from the governor's office. So just sharing that information with you, and as I try to digest this information moving forward.
Thank you. Facilitator voice. I would say yes, and there is a floor that keeps you from getting in trouble with the governor's office, but the intent is to go past that, right? And also thinking about not just having the language, and yes, you all do have conversations about the gray box, but ensuring that the way that things are structured when we're talking about the volume of rules, that there is room to have a productive conversation more often. So that's one of those other things that kind of take it to the next level, right? Y'all are above board as far as the governor's office is concerned, but that's the bare minimum. But I do understand the kind of like contradictory of this is what we have and the governor says it's like it works and we can do more.
I appreciate this conversation a lot, tremendously, Board Member Hemmons, because I specifically raised the issue about the gray box as related to rules and how were we actually ensuring that an equity lens was considered when we were designing or changing that rule. And I have to say, quite honestly, I was a bit disturbed by, the responses that I got. So I'm hoping that as we move forward with this strategic plan, that we're able to actually figure out how to incorporate an equity lens throughout all of these pillars. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hemmings. Yes.
Executive Director Fox. Part of it too, I think, in my understanding, with DAS and the governor's office is trying to take what we do, as you stated, to the next level and flesh out more of something like we don't have is like a equity statement as an agency that's out there that everyone understands. We may be doing some stuff on equity, but everyone externally doesn't know exactly what those conversations are. How do you take and apply and operationalize it when we're talking about rules or in anything, everything that we do? The governor's office wants us to be able to overlay that in and talk about equity. How do you, Board Member Hemmings touched on it with the different pillars, make sure that we're embedding a racial equity goal in each of those. And same thing with our mission, vision is how do we take a step back and even the values take a step back and say, how do we include equity and what that is based off of the DEI plan that former Governor Brown and now Governor Kotek is champion, and they want to see by December 31 of this year. So that just sharing a little perspective there.
Secretary Boyce, anything else?
Right. So a topic to be explored in much more depth as we go through days. So we've talked about the this idea of the strategic pillars, and actually pillars is kind of a word that's emerged since these 5 categories or 5 elements of the strategic plan were first used in 2019. Some of you may know that we were first talking to our staff member Schnabel about how should we structure the plan, and he kind of borrowed this from the California Board of Pharmacy's plan. I'll show what they are in a minute. But the value of having sort of some themes or categories in the strategic plan is to make sure that we're thinking holistically about what are the different areas that we should be potentially focusing on, to make sure that we don't miss things that are important. And over the course of the last 5 cycles or 4 cycles, there's been some adjustment, right? We focus on, technician has been a big emphasis, but as we've made more progress on technician, maybe we're emphasizing other things. So the idea is we have these pillars. We don't have to have the same level of effort across all 5 or 6 pillars. We may, and from one plan cycle to another, say we're all good on these 2, but these 3 really need effort. So it's kind of allows you to to redeploy your investment of effort into different areas. So we've seen meaningful progress on all the areas. And so over time, because we've kept those 5 categories, they've kind of become now what we're calling pillars. So here's what they are, what they have been. Technicians, technology, licensing and registration, regulation, and communication. And as Joe went through, there were actions and goals under each of those. And we have a handout with the current goals for each of those 5. But kind of at this inflection point, the thought was maybe we need to do a little bit of tweaking of these. And so rather than have a big debate, we could have a big debate, but I'm going to throw out a proposal. So the first proposal is, technicians is just one piece of the array of individual roles that support the practice of pharmacy. So the idea was to broaden it to basically encompass all the roles. So options for that new name would be licensees. I will say it's a little tricky for me because we have licensing. And if you talk about licensees and licensing, if you're speaking fast, then which are you talking about, licensing or licensees? So some other options would be professionals, practitioners, or people. So I actually want to stop and get board feedback and staff input on. First question is, do you agree that it's time now to peel off the technician specific label and put something that's more holistic? So one of our pillars is the people who practice pharmacy or support the practice of pharmacy. And if so, which term, which word kind of makes sense? We're going to kind of stick with a one word name. So comments? Seems like a good idea. You know, in conversations we've had leading up to today, I've asked folks about this and gotten pretty consistent. Yeah, that makes sense. But if it does make sense, then what word do you prefer? Like to have a decision today.
I
Yes.
remember him, and so I have a clarification question. What's the intent of the current pillars of technician? Really just focused on technicians or the definition of the board of what a technician is, or was I want to stop there. That pause there.
Go ahead.
This is board member Beaman. I'll try to respond to that. So in the original strategic plan in 2019, the rules around technicians were there, but it wasn't. The board was concerned with how it was defined and that it was too limited in terms of what a technician can do. So reevaluating them and looking at and the rules packages we've seen have and also with legislative changes since then, it has expanded that technician role to try to support the pharmacists better. So that's why technicians itself was its own pillar, because it was it just needed to be re-examined as a whole thing, but it was such a big lift that it took its own pillar to do that.
Yeah.
And in response to facilitator Pandy's question, I do like the idea of broadening that pillar to encompass. I like licensees, but I understand the confusion between if we change that to licensees, then licensing or registration would be a bit confusing. But I think that where we were with technicians being sort of a sticking point years ago, we're now and pharmacy is in a place that all the licensees are kind of a sticking point, because we didn't just lose technicians, we lost a lot of pharmacists too. And how do we support the pharmacists that are still there that are, I'm sorry, we will eventually lose if and I know it's not our duty is to the public, but by providing the resources needed via our role here to our licensees, that is how we protect the public. So it's not cut and dry. We don't worry about the licensees. I think we do need to kind of shift and see how our rules are impacting the licensees as a whole. And I also don't know if licensees, because we license the people and the places. So using the term licensees, or I don't know if it can be one pillar, if we would need to incorporate another pillar, but also in seeing licensees as the outlets too, because the same approach needs to be taken to an outlet, even though it's not an individual licensee and the concerns are different. So I don't know if licensing being its own pillar, and then having, if we needed another pillar, depending on what evolves, having people and places be incorporated under one pillar at this point. Thank you.
Good comment. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, board member Joyce. So personally, I'm not ready to move on from the pillar of technicians, because I still feel there's a lot to address there. However, I understand the intent of broadening it. I like the word personnel, maybe personnel. But, you know, to look specific, I still think there's a lot of work to be done specifically on technicians, but that's just, you know, me, my feelings. Like I said, I understand the intent, what we're trying to do here, what's being introduced here.
So
Personnel, I'm okay with, if we were to broaden it to beyond technicians.
okay, so or what board member Beaman mentioned. So personnel is another option. See that. I would say, Member Joyce, in response, this is facilitator Pandy. The idea of broadening it would not preclude you from saying our priority or goal for this particular phase in our plan and our evolution focuses on technicians. Just the title of the topic would be more all inclusive. And that's kind of the idea of these, that you, if you can arrive at pillars that are fairly constant, then under each one, your objective, your priorities, you can then define more specifically what are we trying to accomplish for this at this point in time. And the reality too is became pretty clear after at least a couple of cycles that, you know, what's the borderline between technician and pharmacist, it affects them both, right? So, you know, if I extend my property line 10 feet, I'm taking 10 feet of my neighbor's property, right? So it is, you can't really take a change to a technician and not be affecting the pharmacist. So they're kind of all very interconnected. I think it's one of the reasons that the rule volume has grown, because you change a rule and it, you know, the thread is, you know, traced to other rules too. So hopefully that works. Yes, board member.
Board member Vipperman, I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're trying to do here. You want to change the pillar technician into a different name, encompassing other things. And I agree with that because we have worked a lot on technicians. We have worked a lot on pharmacists, and hopefully by next year we'll be, you know, done with that, and or at least the heavy lifting of what we started with. And so I like the headline of people, because people encompasses all of the practice. And some of those people in the practice are not licensees, are just clerks, and we need to encompass that as well. And I think that for me anyway, the thought of putting like the outlets and whatnot should be in a different category, because I think that the people are important, and I think it needs to encompass all the people of the pharmacy, and however that looks like as we move forward. And then like have maybe the licensing have, you know, the outlet, but not get rid of that. So I like the idea of having the people, because they're our licensees. They're what we want to protect, and they're what protects the public. So that's my comment. Thank you.
There's a proposal for people as an option. Yes.
Board Member Hall. Might be a silly question, but like, where does the public fall? Is this under, should it be people, or is that just like the roof of the pillar? So I think people would make sense.
I think the intent is that all of these are pillars, are like you said, it's the roof of the pillars are supporting safe practice of pharmacy. We've never done a diagram of this, so, you know, I long since lost count of the number of diagrams I've seen of, pillars and multiple, roofs of all these different levels. I'm not sure we need to go there. The idea here is to make a tweak to something that's working to make it maybe work a little better and be more, so we can continue to use it without having to revisit it every 3 years. That's kind of what I'm suggesting here. Those 5 have worked well for the past 5 cycles, but a couple adjustments might make them more usable for the next 10, 20 years because they're I don't want to say generic enough, but they're broad enough that they work as our priorities and challenges change. We can focus on those different areas. Board Member Chin.
Board Member Chin, not as a licensee, but as just somebody looking at the accountabilities of the pharmacist use technology. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Line to enhance safety, access, service, and efficiency. And we can only affect licensees. I really appreciated Board Beeman's comment about people and places. And I think we need to address the places part in where we can when we're looking at DEI. And we can affect and rule the access and service, that we should have that as not just a people thing.
Mm-hmm. So just mention this, I think it was right now, the licensing is where licensing of the people and licensing of the outlets sort of implied or incorporated. So, Steph, Member Davis, you.
Senator Davis, licensing and registration is a very separate thing and entity. And so I would ask the board to consider, as you're talking about this, like, is it people and places, or is that 2 separate pillars? But I do agree with you that like our charge through the law is that we regulate licensees and registrants, which would be a mouthful to say licensees, registrants, licensing and registration, but those are 2 very different things. I'm not sure that outlet goals and key actions would fall under licensing. Especially as we're looking at like DSCSA and changes to 41 and things like that, potentially.
Okay, so let me just add that since we're talking about other options, let me just share our other suggestions so we don't go through all this, come to an agreement, and then we bring this up and everybody goes, oh, wait a minute, now you just blown it up. So the other suggestion was to, as in looking at literally the definitions of each of those that exist in the plan, the activity of compliance really was not discussed or provided for. So we thought if we can broaden technician and add compliance, then we kind of have covered all what I would describe as the core activities of the Board of Pharmacy. And that way regulation would continue to focus on the rule writing, refinement, change, interpretation, and compliance would focus on support for following the rules, the work that the compliance director is responsible for. So there would be now 6, even number, nothing wrong with odd numbers. And that would be the idea. Now, yeah, so that was the other piece that we were looking to recommend. So, yes, Board Member
Hemmons, just for clarification. So currently regulation includes compliance. So are you saying that you would remove the mentioning of compliance from the goal of regulation and just have a separate compliance pillar?
Yeah, and if you read really what has been expressed in the previous plans, it doesn't, even the regulation one doesn't really talk about compliance. It's really been focused on keeping in mind what the big priority was in 2019. It was about revising the rules. So that regulation category, that regulation topic, really everything around it was about the rule adaptation, adjustment, refinement. And there really was no specific outline for, and think of it at the time, we were focused on, okay, these are the things we're worried about now, but now we're thinking, how do we broaden these so we captured everything a little more clearly? Yes, Vice Director Efmoff.
Staff Member Efmoff, just a question for clarification, and I apologize if this was covered once before, and maybe the structural concept, but can one pillar have more than one goal? Or should it only be one pillar with one goal? Or could something like compliance be part of regulation looking at still if the board wants to pursue the systematic refresh of rules and standardization, and then adding that other kind of component of compliance as another subset goal underneath that pillar?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no rules behind it. It's sort of, you do what you want. Yes, Staff Member McLean.
This is just an observation, Staff Member McLean. So when I look at the list of pillars, in particular, technology and technicians, but technology, I know, if I recall correctly, at the time, what the idea was to be able to get some rules written around the topic of technology to move technology forward. So my question is whether or not technology still needs to be in that list. Because we have moved forward quite a bit, or maybe I'm totally wrong and willing to be wrong. And it's just an observation that kind of the overall organizational Board of Pharmacy organization is missing from that list. The operational part of the agency is missing from that list, in my opinion.
Okay. Yes. Or Chen.
Member Chin, appreciate the comment by board staff. McLean, I wish I could remember last names now. But technology is not done. AI is here and we have not conquered or even started the talk about AI. So I don't think that goes away personally. Because it's scary.
So I would just say that nothing will be perfect. And we're looking for one or two, I guess we do have 2-word title there, the life administration. So, and you have to recognize that if you double click on whatever your list is, there will need to be some clarification. What does this really mean? And yes, it's totally possible. That's one of the reasons I went back and looked at what had been written in the past about regulation to see, did it say anything about actual rule enforcement, which it did not, because that wasn't really the issue at the time. I think based on some of the things that have come up, like the expanding case numbers and the fact that once you've written a rule, that's not the end, that's the beginning. Then it's how do we make that rule work for the board and for the practice of pharmacy. So it seemed like rule development, writing, all that process is super important, but the ongoing application of the rule is really where the rubber meets the road. So it seemed like, wow, it's kind of big miss to not have that kind of called out explicitly. You could incorporate it, though. You could say, well, regulation means both writing it and enforcing it. There's nothing wrong with that. You could say, let's not mess around with it. Let's leave it that way. So, yes, sir.
Executive Director Fox, just an observation just for the board to consider. I think adding the compliance would be good because compliance and regulation, two totally different things, but it just made me start thinking about technology and just the definition that was provided, technology, because it's technology seen as a tool for you to do something. But what's missing there is when we went around this morning, everyone discussed innovation in a certain way. Consider technology innovation, because really innovation is the application of applying the technology and the tools to be able to be used. And I assume from information I've read and listened from everyone that that's the path forward that the board will consider moving forward. So start it out there for consideration.
So Facilitator Pandy, are you suggesting changing technology to innovation or changing that phrase or?
It'd be up to the board. It could be innovation and it's all encapsulating, or you have technology and innovation. I'm just throw that out there, my observation, what I heard this morning.
Board Member Joyce, I do like that idea. I think it's an expansion on the word technology or the specificity of technology. Innovation broadens it. Technology is huge in the practice of pharmacy when it comes to what we're looking at going forward. With IV admixture and the requirements going forward with that, with barcode and QR code scanning technology and video camera technology to check IV admixture, and that is a patient safety issue. So I think, innovation kind of broadens that because you are looking at ways to expand the practice of pharmacy with the use of technology. So I do like that. And then as far as regulation, compliance regulation. I mean, it does say under that pillar that rules updates should emphasize clarity, compliance, and longevity that allows practice variation that improves access and efficiency. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't think there was a need to include a separate pillar for that. I think compliance and regulation kind of go hand in hand. But as far as technology innovation, I do support the idea of innovation as an expansion to that pillar.
All right. So other comments, hoping we can kind of get down to, okay, what are the 5, 6, 7 that everybody can be comfortable and live with? Doesn't mean we can't tweak them later. We have the activity that we're going to be doing next set up with 6. We weren't like just assuming this would all go the way we recommended, but we had to kind of structure the discussion. So we'll probably, I don't know if we can adjust if we change them, but we'll have to kind of have the mindset that, we had to do something. But so right now, if we were to come up with one that were to describe what the, sort of like X, formerly known as Twitter, blank, formerly known as technicians, how many, like, a quick show of hands, people? You can ensure your hands high enough. How many, like, personnel? What was the other? Was there other? What was the third proposal?
Places.
Oh, people and places? I mean, like that. Trying to find where's the one thing that sounds like, oh, it resonates, this will be good. We can use this as an alternative to technicians, or should we just stick with technicians?
We didn't say licensees.
Licensees. I mean, like licensees.
That includes everything.
No,
No?
registrants, outlets are registrants.
Um,
No.
Okay, so didn't see a lot of hands for people. So there's another alternative. I flipped this so I could kind of start a revised list. So.
What?
Yes.
Board Member Hemmons, I guess I'm trying to understand why, I'm not saying I disagree or agree. I'm just trying to understand why are we changing it? What happened? Was there something that I'm not saying we shouldn't, right? I'm just trying to understand. Why are we having this discussion about changing technician? Was there something that we discovered over the past year? Now that we're saying, hey, this doesn't really work anymore. Why are we having this discussion to change it? Did something happen in the last year? From the last strategic plan when it was originally created? Why now we're kind of thinking, no, maybe this isn't really.
So Facilitator Pandy, having originally discussed this with staff member, former executive director Schnabel, and then talked to other people about it. I think the point was in 2019, the need to clarify and address the challenges of what were the technician's responsibility was a big priority. So the name technician was described, but nobody thought, well, in 5 years, if I'm a practitioner of pharmacy and I open up the Board of Pharmacy strategic plan, I just say technician, and I'm a doctor of pharmacy, what am I, chopped liver? So in other words, it's limiting that people category to just a technician. So as we've used these categories over the several years, there's a lot of progress that's been made on the technician side, but this pillar still makes sense to talk about the people or the practitioners or the folks that are practicing pharmacy, but maybe it should be a little broader rather than just talk about technicians. Because it's sort of by mentioning them specifically, it excludes others. So we're trying to come up with something that's more inclusive or comprehensive.
Board Member Beeman, I think also as we went down the technician avenue and as we've gone down other licensee avenues and reviewed those rules, they're so intertwined. And I even think outlets are intertwined in that in a lot of ways. And when we see and hear staff member Davis about this piece used to be in the outlet section, but it didn't really belong there. And now it should belong in the pharmacist section. So we're moving it into the pharmacist role. This pillar of just technicians it's evolved to something more. And to me, that's licensees or however we're going to title it, because they are so intertwined, because you can't talk about what a technician can or can't do without talking about what the pharmacist is allowed to do and what is the outlet's responsibility in overseeing those. And so, but at least that was how my perspective of this shifted through the rulemaking process of one thing is changing and the other one has to change too. And then you have the outlet here that needs to change to accommodate both changes. And so it's hard to isolate one personnel piece within the pharmacy structure without having it affect all the other pieces, including outlet. But that was just how my brain evolved going through writing the rules and seeing the rules and where pieces were and where they have to be moved to. Well,
Member Chin. So listening to Board Member Beeman, a potential thought would be a 6th pillar being licensees, registrants, that we get to the different avenues of what we need to really look at with all the eyes that we need to look at them with now. And then I know you don't like the and, but regulation and compliance go hand in hand. And I'm not opposed to putting that with regulation, not under regulation, but and regulation. And compliance. Just a thought.
All right, team, let me write that up here. So what your idea again? Licensees is one.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to licensing and registration, which is completely different as registrants, as you call them. So fondly.
Law calls them.
I'm a registrant.
Just don't say that fast people think you're talking about somewhere to eat. Okay.
Innovation, because I think I really like that. Licensing and registration, that's a separate whole idea. Regulation and compliance. I think those go hand in hand and aren't necessarily separate. That need to be called out, not just under it. And communication.
Board Member Hemmons, where does the outlets come in?
Registrant.
Okay.
So one thing I want to make clear is part of the objective of doing this is so you don't have to revisit this every time you do your strategic plan. Because there is that option. That was a little bit what was done in 2019. The reason it said technician is because right now, this is where we really need to focus our efforts. And you could say every time we do a new plan, we rethink that list. But because they have been useful categories for this many cycles, the idea was if we come up with ones that will be like I said before, stable, then when we start to work on our goals and objectives or priorities each cycle, we just kind of focus on, okay, are there specific things we need to accomplish here? Are there specific things we not need to accomplish here? Maybe we're good here. We don't need to do anything. We don't have to worry about the broad structure of the plan. It's the content that we're aiming for. So that's why if we come up with a list that everybody feels like, yeah, this covers it. Obviously, they're just one word or two words. We need to describe it. Now we can just focus on, okay, where are the needs the greatest? And we've kind of captured all of the main categories. I think that was clear, but I want to make sure, because we could say, we'll reinvent them every time we do a new plan. But it seems like, look at what we're talking about now, right? We're having all this discussion and coming up with the categories. If we can kind of set that aside, we can focus on maybe more effective conversation. Board Member Bipperman.
Board Member Hemmings, did you get your question answered about the technician? Did you get were you okay with what was provided about why we need to change that into technician?
Somewhat.
Because, in 2019, when we had that pillar, like it within the contents of the last, 5 years, we have taken all those rules and we've reinvented them. It used to say, this is what a technician can do. We did away with all of that. And we put new rules in to say, this is what the pharmacist can allow you to do. So it's very different. And it was a big lift. And so we changed the rules dramatically. And that's why it was so big back then. But now we're under a different rule set and we manage that. And so we don't need to focus that intent on the technicians anymore. We should be focusing on, like a board member Beeman said, all of them, because each is intertwined. And we've only focused on that one. We need to focus on all the other things as well. Is that better? Okay.
So it wasn't just 1 year, it was really a sequence of years.
Yeah, long time.
All right, Facilitator Pandy, question. Who has proposed changes to this, or can we live with this? Yes, Board Member Joy.
Board Member Joy, so there's always that need or demand for transparency from state organizations and boards. I don't know, I just thought maybe under communication, add communication and transparency. Maybe that's too much, but we always get requests for, better access to information on the board website, for example, and then transparency at that juncture. So I don't know if that's too much, maybe communication and transparency, or if that just falls under communication.
Board Member Hemmings, I would say, one of the goals of communication would be transparency.
Right,
Yeah.
but do we need to call it communication and transparency, or just that's too much?
Board Member Chin.
Board Member Chin, I kind of think with, along with Board Member Hemmons, I think that we need to update the goal to include transparency, absolutely.
Yeah,
But I don't know that it needs to be in the title, but I think it should be in the goal.
yes.
Staff Member Davis, just because you were considering adding this new category, licensees and registrant, and then licensing and registration is a mouthful. I was kind of conferring with my license colleague over here. Potentially thinking about, there was a time, right? Like if you think back to when you made the strategic plan, you guys would need to speak to that. But I believe if you look at the key actions, it was a lot of getting stuff online and getting rid of paper applications. And at this point, if you were to have pillars for licensees and registrants, then could the goals, key actions related to licensing and registration then naturally fall under those? Because they are directly related to those categories. So that might be a way to get rid of the mouthful that I potentially present for you guys for consideration.
Yes.
And again, and also just because of the nature of what I do, I'm also looking at process versus, correct categories. They're very distinct, but they all fall under licensing and registration.
So in saying that, so there, Andy, you saying that having it as a separate pillar helps kind of focus on that operating dimension?
I don't,
It's okay to say yes.
yeah, I would say, not necessarily. I think that the processes could easily go under the pillar of technicians and registrants, or not technicians, licensing and registrants. It's just however you would want to structure it. But I just, like I said, there's a difference between getting people in the right categories and the actual processes to get there.
So this is Board Member Hemmett. So are you saying that we would not have a license and registration as its own pillar, but we would include it in as a goal within the licensee and registrant pillars?
It could be, I think.
Board Member Beeman?
Board Member Beeman. I'm sure there are other processes we hear that are important. Or I'm sorry, there are other processes that we don't hear about, that we don't understand the details of as board members, that are happening among staff that are still holding things up to say as a pillar. So could we redefine licensing as registration as staff processes, or some are operations, just to not just encompass the licensing and registration component of it? Because again, back in 2019, it needed a lift. And now if we can broaden that, like we are potentially doing to technicians, and making it more organizational processes rather than just calling out this one piece when there are so many other moving parts going on. And I don't know the best title for it. I heard operation.
Actually, that's something that I'd wondered about.
Yeah.
It came up earlier when we were talking about the, activity of, kind of running the machine. I think there are some of the things that we've talked about in terms of the, our report that kind of tie back to, how we run in the operation. So, if that kind of makes it all cleaner and helps you focus on the processes and the systems that support the work. Just telling you, my opinion, I think replacing that there and going with those as just your advisor, I think it's a pretty good list, actually.
I think that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Okay. So, or tentatively, anything I write up here is not, that this is erasable marker.
Why we say it's paper and not stone.
So, you have a comment?
I was thinking about Board Member Joyce and the question about the communication and the definition as defined, and looking at the goal of communication. And there's transparency is already one of the bullet point values already. But in my mind, I'm thinking about, because we're talking about public engagement, proactive communication strategies. And when you think about transparency, it's how to make information accessible. How do you promote that collaboration? How do you have inclusive outreach and public engagement with all stakeholders. A culture of the accountability piece, and just something for the board to consider, would it make sense to take that communication pillar and make it empowerment? Because you're doing a lot of different things within the goal and some of the things that has been stated already. So I just throw that out there. Just a opinion, just listening to things.
Comments?
This board member Hemmons, I like empowerment. I'm thinking about just in my experience with humans, that I say this without, that who is this being written for? Is this for us or is this for the public? Right? So I'm just thinking empowerment. Humans, people may not necessarily understand empowerment, what our intent is, if we just say empowerment. But I like empowerment but all the time, but I'm just kind of concerned about whether or not it will convey what it is that we're trying to convey, the message, as a pillar. If we said empowerment versus communication, or communication and empowerment. Is there a way that we could include empowerment in there without it necessarily being the pillar?
Well, I think, and it can be incorporated in the values as well. I'd sort of, from a historical perspective, 2019 being history, I think that the intent of communication at that time was this agency was pretty anonymous and not super proactive in communicating. You guys on staff who are around and board members will remember more than I do, but so I think the idea was pretty, when we talked about communication, it was tended to be pretty comprehensive, both informing and to some degree advocating for the practice of pharmacy. So it was really meant to be a pretty dynamic category, right? So under communication, you could have a variety of different objectives that might relate to, how do we, literally, how do we get OHA to listen to us, or how do we be more visible, and so I think there was a little bit of, we got to speak up and be more visible and vocal, but there was also how do we communicate with practitioners. So that's kind of what I recall about it. So I've always felt like if you double clicked on that, you'd realize, there's a lot under there that you can adapt based on, okay, here's what we're trying to push now. I don't know if anybody that makes sense resonate with what you recall from back then, looking at the long time board members. Yes, board member Henning.
Board member Hemmons, and I think in listening earlier today, about the concerns around, I think it was board member Beeman who said all the different rules and board members not even remembering what they agreed to and how unfair it was for the public and for registered licensees. You think about communication. I think that also feeds into communication. And I don't know if you use this word here on the board, stakeholders. That might be another word to embed in here. Oh, there is, it's here. Sorry.
We've used it.
But in terms of communication, how, we as a board communicate with various stakeholders, not just about what we're doing, but in terms of rules.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
confusion around that.
Well, board member Vipperman, and I like the word empowerment. I like that a lot, but I think that the communication pillar is super important still. I think we should be working on that. I think it's like not one that is like, oh, we've worked on it a lot. And so maybe have that under that, but, for me, the communication is still lacking. We're not getting, our messages to our licensees. That's my own opinion. And I talked to a lot of licensees just willy-nilly, out in the rural area. I live in Bend and I'm like, hey, did you know da da da? No. So for me, I think that the communication piece should stay there. I think we should expand on it and change maybe the goals of it. I think that's a huge change that we should make in this meeting today, and maybe work on that.
Okay. Board Member Beam.
Board Member Beeman. And I think too, to elaborate on Board Member Viperin's comments, being one of the, senior members here. Back in 2019, transparency was a big issue and was a hot topic of why we put this as the goal. And I think it was that we boiled it down to communication was the missing piece. And for whatever reason, this is one of our pillars that I think we've performed the least on overall since then. And I think definitely outreach was impacted because of the pandemic and because we couldn't get out to people. But I also think too, the tone of towards licensees from the board has significantly changed. And we hear it a lot. And whether it's one person's perception or not, we hear it enough from different voices that it's concerning and it's not something you're proud to be a part of, if that's the perception. So I think in the communication piece, also building in our board requirement as how we can maybe improve that in terms of tone and professionalism and however we kind of see. But I think that there's so many factors that have happened that have shut kind of that communication line down a bit. But I think this pillar needs some restructuring within its own, like the title's great. We still need to keep working for it. But it's hard I like the term empowerment. I really do, but I don't feel like our communication strategy currently is empowering to our licensees. And that's frustrating for me. So I do think we need to take a deep dive as to that this isn't our strong suit still.
Good. Thank you.
Board Member Hemmons, public relations. We need a public relations person. That's what we need. You are to the budget.
Right. To the budget. Right.
Yeah, I like it.
Great. So I'm speaking. So any objection or major heartburn if we were to say, okay, these are going to be the updated pillars that we're going to the structure around which we're going to define our goals and priorities for the strategic plan going forward. And ideally, we can keep using it. So, every year when we go to revise a plan or every 2 years when we go to, really rethink the plan, we're going to kind of sit with these. It doesn't mean you can't ever change them, obviously, but that's kind of the idea that we'd have sort of buckets. Under those buckets, plenty of room to play, right? That makes metaphor, but everybody, any major concern with this? Everybody, maybe a show of hands. Who can live with these as our pillars? Right, looks like they're all up. Right, I mean, was your hand there?
No, I am struggling with, I guess I need to see it flushed out, how we're going to include the licenses and registration in 1 and 2, the new 1 and 2 pillars. I'm curious to see how are you framing the goals to include what you have in license and registration so you can get rid of that pillar?
I think that's what we do next.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what we're gonna have to do is take a break because we had, been presumptuous saying, okay, these are the pillars we're gonna work on, but we can adapt to these. I think part of it, or this is facilitator handy. But to answer partly your question, Board Member Hemmings, is we've said, well, a lot of this was about kind of the nuts and bolts.
Oh, you added operation.
Operations is replaced.
I missed that.
I
Okay,
didn't write it very big.
okay.
All right, so the licensees, restaurants, restaurant, innovation, operations, regulation and compliance and communication. Right? Like little text thumbs ups. Okay.
And we didn't want to do technology and innovation. We just want to do innovation only.
Right. Plan. All right. So we're going to next transition to our first round robin activity. But I think because we've tweaked these, why don't we take a 5-minute break? That way, Brittany, Ashley, and I can kind of reorient, and yeah, then we'll get back together and break into 3 groups, and have a chance to comment on these different areas.
Are we making the groups now or when we come back?
We sort of have the groups. I don't know if I need to change the groups, but we just need to powwow on how we're going to divvy stuff up. So.
So reconvene at 11:53.
11:55.
55.
Facilitator generosity.